This is a little video I decided to do after a conversation I had with an old friend I haven't seen in a while. He'd be the type that would be open to the ideas in the dissident right. He asked me who I was voting for. He assumed that although I criticise Labour, I'd vote for them anyway. The Irish in Britain tend to, and I've never been a fan of the Tories. The treatment of the hunger strikers, the miners, and unions, it all goes before the Tories, on top of the rampant capitalism. I told him the left-right, Labour-Conservative paradigm you're offered today is completely false. Labour socialism, although some of it not bad in and of itself, in moderation of course, coupled with loose immigration policies, it's guaranteed to increase immigration from 350,000 a year to near a million. This will destroy the NHS, hurt the working and working poor in stagnant wages, increased rents, inability to buy a house, and completely wipe out any net benefit Labour's policies strive for. Tories, on the other hand, they won't protect the NHS, and they will maintain immigration at 350,000 a year, where it is sat. Despite claims they will get it to the tens of thousands, it will come from second and third world rather than the EU. Rent and house prices will increase regardless. Both options only serve international finance, capitalists and wealthy elite. Labour supplies them cheap labour, an increase in consumers, an increase in assets value. Tories keep the taxes low and do all that Labour do, albeit at a slower rate. He told me he was so caught up in the threat to the NHS he'd never even thought about immigration. So, it got me thinking, why someone who would be open to the ideas on the dissident right isn't thinking about immigration? And it made me think about a famous experiment. The Milgram experiment, you know, the one testing authority and obedience. 2 rooms are set up beside each other, one with an electric shock panel, one with an electric shocker. The supposed goal of the experiment is to test the teacher-learner punishment hypothesis. One participant is a paid actor, and he's in on the experiment. The other, the real participant. The actor is hooked up to the shocker in one room, and the real participant is given controls to an electric shock panel in another room. He's overseen by a man in a lab coat, the authority figure. The experiment is simple enough. The actor is asked questions by the participant in the next room. Questions that shouldn't be difficult to answer. The teacher, the real participant, is told to administer an electric shock every time the learner makes a mistake and increase the level of shock each time. There were 30 switches on the shock generator, marked 15 volts, slight shock, up to 450 volts, danger, severe. Well, the actor gives mainly wrong answers deliberately, and after each wrong answer can be heard screaming in the next room. This continues until a very high voltage, then silence. And you see, throughout the experiment, people did object to administering shocks, especially when they knew they were causing harm. But any resistance to administering these electric shocks was met with prods from the authority figure that the participant must continue. 65% of participants administered 450 volts and 100% went to 300 volts. Both of these volts are lethal doses. What does this mean? Well, ordinary people are knowingly willing to hurt and potentially kill people because an authority tells them to. How does this relate? We know that the current authorities are doing great harm, are destroying the future of our peoples, are killing our nations, and we are the moral beings telling people to stop rather than continue. There is a parallel with the insidiousness of the current paradigm. People are told they must continue inflicting harm to their people, and it is in fact virtuous to do so. But not only that, they are also threatened with harm to themselves personally if they don't, or if they reject. There's multiple layers of both positive and negative reinforcement to continue this madness. And so it is no surprise that many people today know what is happening and are sympathetic, yet they remain silent. A kind of bystander syndrome. Why? It's much more difficult to be the first person to act in a crowd than to follow once someone has acted. Liberal elitist authorities today do not ask you to administer the metaphorical shocks, although they will reward you if you do. They simply demand those that do not want to participate in harming their people to stay silent. Do nothing and you will be thought of as good. Do nothing to protect your people. Do nothing to save your nation. And because of the dynamics at play for normies today, it was more difficult for the people who continued causing harm in this experiment than it is for those normies simply to speak up. And everyone in that experiment administered lethal voltages. I hope the bizarre nature of that makes sense, but the psychological importance of it terrifies me, and if that does not terrify you, nothing will. These psychological realities are used against us. This is what we're up against, and our enemies know that. We must go above and beyond to combat this reality. Enoch Powell said, "To see and not to speak is the great betrayal. Those that do nothing, that say nothing, they're left alone." Well, the great mass says nothing, but they tell all at the ballot box. The Conservative landslide shows the people have spoken, hushed in tone to avoid accusations. They have nevertheless implied their will, or at least the direction they wish to travel, by electing the best of a bad bunch. It is not a rejection of socialism. I don't know a single person, bar Farage, that would happily give up the NHS. I know many who, providing they were run correctly, would love the renationalisation of public services, transport, utilities. It is an assertion by the British. We are still a people, and we want to be heard. It is a rejection of woke culture. What they have voted for was the rejection of the complete and utter capitulation by the Labour Party to the elevation of minorities and others over the stock of the nation. The Tories will not reverse the damage already done. They will continue the demographic onslaught of the British people, but they will not cut the head of the white British the way Labour would have. So what is the solution to halting the onslaught? Critical mass. Not critical mass in opinion. The people have spoken at the ballot box. Critical mass and people willing to speak up, therefore giving others the courage to do so too. What is stopping people speaking up? Well, that's obvious. The liberal dominance of the conversational Overton window, a lack of vocabulary or skill around having optical conversations, and accusations of racism, of course. I seen a video a while back by Beware the Risen People called Irish Nationalist Rhetoric. It is a great bit of content. I love what he's doing, amongst others. Beware the Risen People is right. It's essential we fight credo with credo, rhetoric with rhetoric. But more than that, rhetoric is extremely potent in shifting the Overton window, which is thankfully what has been happening within and because of the dissident right. There is some genuine world-class thought leaders in the Irish movement. The likes of Keith Woods comes to mind, but his ideas are hard to transmit to people uninitiated or uninformed. And the immediate action to be taken is to relate the Conservative win in England to Ireland. Now is not a time to gloat to Liberals. Now is a learning opportunity, at least for those capable. Now is the time when you hear or see someone claim the British are stupid or racist, is to relate the outcome to working class interests, and to relate that to Ireland, and to relate the facts white working class British have legitimate grievances, have legitimate concerns. They have a right to protect their self-interest against Labour's anti-white manifesto. They have the right to an identity other than that of guilt-ridden descendants of colonial masters. They've had to take a chance of losing the NHS in order to protect their group interests. This is not racist. This is not stupid or racist. It's tragic. You may be anti-British yourself, but we have common cause and are set upon by a common enemy. What befalls Britain will happen in Ireland. Use it as an opportunity to talk. Now is a time for soldiers to explain to people who cannot understand how Boris Johnson got elected, to talk about the British people's collective rights and how they've been overlooked, and how it is and will happen more in Ireland. To explain, although Labour were offering the world economically, they chose their country and their people. And although voting for Boris Johnson may have a negative impact on them, voting for Labour would have a disastrous impact on white Britain's collective group. One only needs to read the Labour manifesto and see the drivel for what it is. I know for most this reaches. You will be one of the few willing to speak. But if you're not, this is the time. For now, let the thought leaders shift the Overton window and leave the rhetoric to those adept at it. It is time to normalise conversations around demographics and optically imply what changing demographics means for native populations. Correct people's assertions the Tory win had anything to do with socialism or anti-Semitism, and crowbar in, if you must, optical conversations about demographics and the feelings of alienation in one's own country. The white working class of Britain are to be sympathised with, not demonised. Elevate your conversations. Learn what is appropriate to talk about, what will push people away from our goals, and when to conceal your power levels. Now is a learning opportunity. It is an opportunity for sincere optical conversations to be had.